What's up, riders? My name is Chewy. Today we're going to be taking a look at the belt drive kit and what it's like to use on a mountain bike. Let's check it out. Rightio, so today we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into what it's like to be using a belt drive kit on a mountain bike. Now before we get too far into this video, I want to make it clear that you can't necessarily just simply swap your bike from a chain to a belt. There's a couple of limiting factors. One, if you're riding a cassette and a derailleur, you're not going to be able to swap over to a belt drive system. If you have a single straight chain line, like on a single speed bike or a gearbox bike, then you might be able to swap over to a belt, and you also need to be able to split the rear triangle to get the belt inside the rear triangle. You don't need to do that with a chain because obviously chains have links and you can undo the chain link and put it through the rear triangle, but with a belt you can't do that. So there has to be some sort of access point, whether it be a pivot that you can undo the pivot and put it through there, or a totally open rear end. So if you're watching this video and you've already got a chain, you probably can't swap it over. Generally, when you buy your bicycle as an option, you'll be able to see whether you can spec it with a chain or a belt. Some bikes like my Zeroed, you can actually retrofit it and you have to buy the kit from the manufacturer to actually swap it over. And it's a bigger job than you might think. So pay attention to what bike you have because it might not be an option for you. Now, you've probably not even considered running a belt, and why would you even consider it over chain? Chains do a very good job, and they've been doing a very good job for a long time. So what benefits does a belt drive have over a chain, and what disadvantages does a chain have? Well, to start with, a chain is made of metal. Now, chains are generally fairly stiff left and right to help you shift up gears, but they're generally very flexible up and down to help it follow the chain line and go around all the cogs. But because they're flexible up and down, it means they're prone to flopping around. And if you've ever seen any slow motion videos of a bike being compressed over a big bump or going over successive bumps like on a downhill race, watch the slow-mo and have a close look at the drive chain. Now, chains can actually flop around so much over bumps that they can actually touch the ground, and that's the reason why dropping a chain is so common. Especially if you don't have a narrow wide setup or any sort of chain retention system, it's very easy to drop a chain. And one thing that I didn't consider until I actually started running the belt drive kit was how noisy a chain is under normal operation. Now, I don't mean noise from chain slap where it actually slaps on the rear chainstay. That we can prevent by putting some chain slap material on the rear chainstay. What I mean is the actual engagement and disengagement of the cogs as it goes around. So when you tip your bike upside down and pedal it, you hear that sound. That is quite noisy, and there's none of that noise when you have a belt. I didn't even really consider how much noise it makes actually when it goes around and through the little jockey wheels in the derailleur or the chain tensioner until I actually put the belt drive on. So that is quite interesting as well. If you don't like noise, then a belt drive kit is going to be probably one of the main draw cards for you. Now, chains being made of a metal, as you know, require maintenance and chain lube. Now, I didn't notice this before until I got this light green color bike that I'm riding now, actually how much chain lube splashes off the chain and onto the rear of the bike. That includes the rear chainstay, the rear hub, and actually onto the rear brake and brake rotor. Now, one thing I always like to do is keep my bike perfectly clean. Now, during a ride, obviously your bike's going to get dirty. Now, when you wash your bike after a ride, you generally have to degrease your chain and then re-oil it. Now, if you skip this degreasing process, you get like an annoying smear of chain lube on the back of the bike. And if you're a perfectionist like me and you like to keep your bike in your living room, this is particularly annoying. Now, the weights. I know you're all concerned about the weight of the belt drive kit versus the chain drive kit because mountain bikers are very, very weight conscious. Let's have a look at the difference in weight between a belt drive kit and the chain drive kit that's probably already on your bike. You'll be surprised to know that the bike weighs exactly the same after the swap. So what I mean by that is I've got here all of the components of the chain drive kit sitting here on the scales, which weighs a total of 531 grams. And all of the components of the belt drive kit weighs 533 grams. That's only 2 grams different, so essentially exactly the same. So if you do retrofit your bike to a belt drive kit, it's going to weigh exactly the same as before. But one very interesting thing is that the chain itself is much heavier than the belt. Let's have a look at the weights of the chain versus the belt. So the chain that I took off my bike weighed a total of 246 grams. Now, as you can see, this chain is a particularly light chain. It's got a hollow pin and the plates are actually hollowed out as well. This is probably one of the lightest chains I could find. That weighs 246 grams. Now, you compare that to the belt of the same length, that's only 94 grams. Now, that is very important because the chain that can't support itself up and down, remember, has a lot more inertia. And that inertia, when you go over a bump, is what overcomes the chain tensioner and allows it to flop down and touch the ground. Now, the belt weighing just 94 grams has nowhere near the same inertia as a chain, so the tensioner is much more effective at keeping the belt in place than a chain tensioner is at keeping the chain in place. So that means when you go over a big bump or successive hits, the belt is able to stay in place and flop around a lot less than a chain, which equates to a much quieter bike on the trail. Obviously, the chain isn't slapping on the rear chainstay either, and the belt being made of things that aren't metal is actually much quieter as well. So there's no chain slap whatsoever. So if the belt weighs so much less than the chain, where's the extra weight in the belt drive kit? It's actually mostly in the sprockets. So when you take your chain sprocket off, you'll notice it's a lot thinner and a lot lighter than the actual belt drive equivalent. Because the belt's quite wide, so the belt drive sprockets are a bit more substantial than its chain drive equivalent. So what other advantages might a belt drive system have over a chain drive system? Now, obviously the main one for me is the noise. The belt is much quieter than the chain, but another huge bonus for me is when you wash your bike, you're skipping a whole process, and that process is the degreasing of the chain and the sprockets and getting all the chain lube off the back of your bike, and then obviously re-lubing the chain. That is a whole process which takes almost as much time as it takes to wash the bike. So you're skipping that altogether. Man, the cleanup of my bike now is so much faster. Like I said, I like to keep my bike perfectly clean after every ride. So let's say now you go on a muddy ride, you come home, you hose the mud off, you give it a soapy wash with a brush, you give it a dry off, job done. There's nothing else you need to do. Whereas with the chain drive, you do all that process and then you got to clean the whole drivetrain, re-lube everything, and it's a huge time saver. And there's nothing worse than that horrible black stuff that your chain lube turns into after a couple of rides. Now, one thing that I was wondering about before I did change over to the belt drive kit is how would the belt drive kit feel when you're pedaling? Let's say you're doing a fast start or you want to crank up a hill. Does it have like a rubbery rubber band feeling? And the answer is no, not at all. What it does feel like that I was quite pleased with actually is because it's not made of metal, you're kind of almost disengaging yourself from the drivetrain a little bit. So it doesn't feel elasticy or rubbery or stretchy at all. So it does feel a little bit smoother, a little bit more damped when you actually do put hard pedal strokes in, which is quite nice. And a lot of people are also concerned about the strength of the belt. If I put a hard pedal stroke in, can I snap the belt? Are they strong enough? And the answer is no, you won't snap the belt. They are very strong. Belt drives have been used on motorcycles for a long time. In particular, a motorcycle brand that you might know called Harley Davidson, which has a lot of horsepower compared to how much power you can put through your pedals. So don't worry about the belt breaking. It will probably only break under some sort of strange circumstance, like if you cut it or if you have misaligned sprockets, something like this. It's probably actually far less likely to break than your chain. And all your chain is a bunch of individual links and plates. So every single link in your chain is actually a weak spot that can actually break. Whereas a belt is one single continuous unit. So as you can probably tell so far, I'm actually pretty stoked on the belt drive conversion kit. Now, one point of concern for a lot of people is is the belt drive kit okay in muddy conditions? Now, I've certainly had my fair share of rides in the rain and the mud on this belt drive kit, and once I had the tensioner system sorted properly, it didn't affect it at all. It was only during the wet muddy rides where my tensioner bearings weren't working properly that it became an issue and started to ride up high on the sprockets, but otherwise it's been fine. The main issues I've had with the belt drive system have all come from the tensioner. A full suspension bike that doesn't pivot around the bottom bracket will require some kind of spring actuated tensioner. Now, my tensioner has been the cause of most of the issues I've encountered. The first issue I had with the belt system itself, specifically in muddy or particularly wet rides, I would notice the belt would ride high on the sprocket and cause the belt to rub on the belt retaining slider at the back. Now, that little slider is a nylon piece that sits right over your rear axle and stops the belt from riding up too high on the sprocket and skipping its tooth. This made the bike considerably more difficult to pedal and in turn wore a groove in that retaining slider, which also was adding wear to the back or the top side of the belt. Now, there was also a terrible squeak that developed over time on wet rides, as you can see here. Now, oddly enough, the cause of this was the cheap toy car bearings that the belt tensioner came out of the box with. Now, to fix this, I simply overhauled the tensioner and replaced the standard steel sealed cartridge bearings with rubber sealed stainless steel bearings, and also used some spacers to add a tiny bit of extra preload to the tensioner. While this might very well be a problem specific to my brand of bike, it would certainly be worth checking out on any tensioner system to prevent any issues before they upset you on the trail. And after overhauling my tensioner system, it actually worked perfectly. I wish I'd have done it a little bit earlier, but I guess I needed to see what would happen if I did leave it. So that's actually what happened. It got really squeaky and it started to ride high on the sprockets and in turn wore the belt. So after I fixed the tensioner system, all I needed to do was change the bearings out so that the belt can be tensioned properly by its own tensioner. And then one thing you might notice is on the back wheel, I changed the rear slider to a pulley wheel. Now, all that is a bit of a fail-safe in case my tensioner does stop working properly again. That little wheel just prevents the belt from riding too high up onto the sprocket and skipping teeth. Now, that wheel can turn with the belt so it won't wear it out instead of actually sliding on the belt like the old slider did. Now, if you've got a chain drive system and your frame manufacturer offers a belt drive kit, I'm just going to quickly take you through the experiences that I had swapping my zeroed over from a chain drive to a belt drive. Now, the whole kit cost about $600 US to convert. That might seem quite expensive, but it's not just the belt and the sprockets in the kit. You've also got that tensioner which has to be swapped over, and on my bike, the whole rear lower chainstay had to be replaced as well, and that's carbon fiber, which means for the manufacturer a whole new set of tooling. Now, the installation on my bike was fairly straightforward with just the usual fiddle to try and get the front and rear drive sprockets perfectly aligned because you want the belt to run dead straight. Now, one thing that I did find was a little bit of an inconvenience if you have to remove and refit your rear wheel all the time, like what I have to if I get it and put it in a taxi or the back of a van, is when you take off your rear wheel, there's one extra step. When you slide your rear axle out, that belt retaining slider, that's a separate piece. And it's one extra piece that you have to hold on to and remember to take with you on a holiday if you do take apart your rear wheel. So it doesn't really take any longer to do. It just makes the removing and refitting of the rear wheel a slight bit more fiddly. And like I said, there's one extra piece to lose, which you need to consider if you go on holidays and travel with your bike. When you take apart your bike to put it in the bike bag, we've all done it or seen someone else do it. You slide your axle out, you put the axle on the side, and then you pack your bike, you zip your bike up, you take it to the airport, you get to your holiday, you go to build your bike, and where's your rear axle? Still sitting on the side of your house. That's something else to consider because you can forget that little rear slider and the rear wheel doesn't go back together without that rear slider. So be careful of that if you do have a belt drive kit. You don't want to ruin your bike trip or your holiday. So that might be one extra thing to consider as well. removing and refitting the rear wheel is not quite as straightforward, but I'm going to say once you get the hang of it, it probably doesn't take you any extra time. Just make sure you don't lose that extra piece because the bike won't go together properly without it. So for me, the main advantages of swapping over from a chain drive to a belt drive system is obviously going to be the noise. You're not getting that chain slap sound, and you're not getting the sound of the metal chain engaging and disengaging metal sprockets and going through jockey wheels. There's none of that sound whatsoever. And the cleanup. The cleanup is a hell of a lot faster when you don't have that whole degreasing and re-oiling process that you do have when you have a chain to look after. So can I recommend swapping over to a belt drive if you have the opportunity to do so, or choose a bike that has a belt drive over a chain drive system? I'm going to definitely say yes. I like it a lot because it is so much quieter when you're on the trail, and actually even just pedaling around the place. I really enjoy a quiet bike. So if you like a quiet bike like me, then this is the kit for you. And also the cleanup. If you like to have your bike nice and clean and you clean it after every ride, then you will think the belt drive kit is perfect. It is so much nicer to clean your bike. Now, I live in a small apartment in Hong Kong, and I quite often have to have my bike in my living room, which is not all bad. So if you have a similar sort of situation, or you just like to have your bike perfectly clean after every ride, then the belt drive kit is going to save you a lot of time, especially if you ride a couple of times a week and you like to wash your bike after each ride. The belt drive kit is just so much easier to clean. I highly recommend going that route if you have the chance as well. So thanks so much for watching. Have you got any questions? Have I missed something? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll answer you down there. If you thought my video was pretty cool, make sure you give it a like and a share. Thanks heaps for watching, guys, and always, you ride on, guys.